Hmm. All right. So today we'll start up a very important topic called as rapid sequence intubation. Now, first of all, if I ask Niharika, what would be the indications to intubate your patient? If I ask you a question like this, then what would you normally give your indications as?
So any patient of obstruction, uh, if has gas vomiting, history of vomiting, aspiration.
No, 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 no. So let me tell you the indication. So whenever if anybody asks you the indications of intubation, the first thing you always say is cardiac arrest. Okay, the first indication to intubate any patient is cardiac arrest. The second indication to intubate a patient is to prevent aspiration if the GCS is less than 8. Okay, very poor GCS in the prevention of aspiration. That is indication number 2. The third indication is extreme hypoxic or hypercapnic respiratory failure. Extreme hypoxic or hypercapnic respiratory failure is indication number 3. Okay, clear on this? Indication number 4 is going in for surgery. Going in for surgery that warrants general anesthesia. This is indication number 4. So there are really only 4 clear-cut indications. Okay, I'll just repeat the 4 clear-cut indications. The first indication is if the patient is in cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest patients, you cannot not intubate. You have to and have to intubate. You cannot put them on NIV. You cannot put them on any other device. If the patient is in cardiac arrest, you have to intubate. There is no other way to do this. Okay. Second thing is if a patient is in poor GCS. Now, why is poor GCS an important indication to intubate? That poor GCS may be because of sepsis, poor GCS may be because of head injury, poor GCS may be because of stroke. When you say GCS means Glasgow Coma Scale. If the Glasgow Coma Scale is low, somewhere around 3, 4, 5, this is one indication to intubate your patients. And why is that so? Because of the fact that if you leave them like that, there is going to be tongue fall, or there might be a vomiting which will induce aspiration, which will cause aspiration. All right, so there can be vomiting, there can be aspiration, and that is why poor GCS is an indication to intubate your patient. That is why the nurse has to be very, very careful during the day. If the patient suddenly becomes unconscious, that is one of the reasons that the tongue will fall behind. If the tongue falls behind within matter of seconds, critically ill patients will die. Unlike patients on the ward, no, you and me, if we are roaming around and we, because of some hypoglycemia, if we go down, we are not ill, we are not sick. So we will immediately wake up also. We will have a vasovagal and we'll wake up. Okay, when we wake up, our tongues will come back to normal. But what happens with a patient who's ill? These reflexes are not okay. So they have lost those reflexes. We normally assume to say that in the case of poor GCS, you lose a gag reflex. And when you lose the gag reflex, the tongue falls behind. There is a high chance that the patient will aspirate. Now, what is the gag reflex? A gag reflex is present in 70% of cases. Please understand this, 30% of all of us will not even have a gag reflex. Okay, so there was a study that was done in a big medical college, and in that medical college, they looked at 100, I think 100 plus students, and in those 100 students, they actually tested for gag reflex, and they found out not everybody had a gag reflex. So it's not necessary that every one of us will have a gag reflex. So looking for that gag reflex is not something that is great. However, we know that the incidence of loss of gag reflex is a chance of getting an aspiration, and that is the reason that a poor GCS has a loss of gag, and that is the reason that a poor GCS, we will need to intubate. So the first indication was cardiac arrest. The second indication is a poor Glasgow Coma Scale. When I say poor Glasgow Coma Scale, all of us should know E4, M5, E6, the Glasgow Coma Scale. It will be asked in the exams. If you don't know, you will not pass the exam because this is basic. E4, M6, V5, you should be able to say oriented, confused, inappropriate, incomprehensible, none for verbal. You must be able to explain all these things. Okay, local obeying commands, localizing, withdrawing, extension. This will be very clear. Okay, and none. Similarly, eye opening to spontaneous, to speech, to pain, to none. So you should know this E4, M6, V5 on the tip of your tongues. Okay. So if the GCS is less than 8, there is a very high chance that you may have to intubate a patient because of the reason that he may aspirate. So low GCS is the second indication. The third indication is extremes of hypoxic and hypercapnic respiratory failure. Extremes of hypoxic and hypercapnic respiratory failure. So that means to say extreme hypoxia. For example, now there is this patient inside the ICU whose oxygen saturations are very, very, very low and not improving. You can't do anything. You have to intubate. Okay, so that is extremes of hypoxia or extremes of hypercapnic respiratory failure, because that will help to the cardiac system to work a little bit more better. That is the real thing. Okay, the cardiac system otherwise will fail. If the patient is hypoxic, the cardiac system will fail. The patient will breathe very, very fast. So that is not something that we want to do. All right. So that is the reason that extreme of hypoxia, extreme of hypercapnia, these are two indications for intubation. And what is the fourth indication? The fourth indication of an intubation is general anesthesia. That means the patient is going for some kind of thoracic surgery, some CABG, some thoracic, some major exploratory laparotomy. So there you require to intubate. So this is the indications for intubation. So unfortunately, whenever in the exams we ask any doctor, tell me the indications for intubation, this doesn't come out only. Okay, so now you understand these four indications. See, Niharika, you're an anesthetist. So, as an anesthetist also, these indications should be very clear. Okay, because if you cannot say vomiting, it has to be very, very clear what the indication has to be. These are the four indications. Okay, rest are all relative indications. Rest all you may be able to manage with an NIV, but these four indications you cannot manage without intubating your patients. Clear on this? So now, why is this intubation such an extremely difficult task? It is extremely difficult task because of the fact that here you are doing something called as laryngoscopy. Okay, that is one of the reasons. Now, a laryngoscopy is supposed to be equal to a abdominal laparotomy incision. That means if you're going to put a laryngoscope in the mouth, it is equivalent to an incision taken on the abdomen without anesthesia. That is the kind of pain you get when you are doing a laryngoscopy. You understand, na? So in the event that you do this procedure without giving certain number of drugs in order to control the pain, control the response, there is a high chance that the patient will arrest and die. Okay, that is why irrespective of what the condition is, it is important to actually give some amount of drugs in order to facilitate a quick laryngoscopy, pain-free laryngoscopy, and a laryngoscopy that does not elicit a reflex that induces a cardiac arrest. That is why laryngoscopy is an extremely important task, extremely important thing that we need to understand how to do this laryngoscopy during an intubation. This is one problem. The second problem in an ICU setup for an intubation is that it is during this time that there is no oxygen going inside. See, you are sitting over here, all of us are breathing. All of us are breathing. None of us are not breathing. Everyone is breathing. Subconsciously, we are all breathing. But this is one time in the procedure that you are preventing the person from breathing at all. So your stopping is breathing. Since your stopping is breathing, there is a high chance that he will have hypoxia. Now you add upon this critical illness. When the person has got critical illness, when the patient has got critical illness, then it is all the more a problem. When there is critical illness, there is all the more a problem. What is the problem? All of us have got a reserve tank. It is called as functional residual capacity. All of us has got a reserve tank. For example, when you're driving a car, when you're driving a scooter, after some time a reserve petrol comes in, isn't it? When you drive for a long time. Now you can drive for some more time because there's a reserve lying over here. Similarly, in our body, when you're breathing up and down, your tidal volumes are going up and down. Then there is a reserve, and that reserve is the functional residual capacity. Unfortunately, what is happening in critically ill patients, this functional residual capacity is markedly reducing. You understand? So in the event that the patient stops breathing, like for example, if you didn't have reserve petrol in your scooter, will you be able to drive your scooter? No, you won't be able to drive a scooter. If there is no reserve petrol in the car, will you be able to drive the car? No. Similarly, if there is no functional residual capacity in your lungs, you cannot, if you stop breathing, you will die. Now what happens in critically ill patient, this functional residual capacity reduces markedly. Now why does this FRC reduce? See, the entire we are breathing because our alveoli are like balloons. There are air inside that alveoli. All right. Now what is happening in an ill patient? This alveoli is getting inflamed. This alveoli is getting flooded with pus. This alveoli is getting flooded with water. This alveoli is collapsing because he's breathing smaller. So because of the collapse, because of the flooding of the alveoli, because of the pus in the alveoli, there is a marked reduction in the volume of the lungs. And since there is this marked reduction in volume in the lungs, the FRC is low. How can you find out this? If you look at an X-ray, if you find opacities here and there, you can assume that the FRC is low. You can assume that the FRC is low. Am I clear on this? Okay. Similarly, if the CT shows white opacities, it shows that the FRC is low. There is no way you can calculate the FRC other than using our ventilator that is there in our ICU called as the GE ventilator, where we are actually looking at the functional residual capacity. Otherwise, there is no other way to figure out your FRC in usual practice. Am I clear on this? So we have to assume now that you know that if you're going to intubate a patient whose GCS is low, you're intubating a patient who's in severe hypoxic respiratory failure. So these are two patients which are critically ill. Now, if they are severe hypoxic respiratory failure, means they are living on their reserve. Okay, if they're going to live on their reserve and you're going to now stop his breathing, that reserve is going to empty very, very quickly. That is why this laryngoscopy in an ICU is very, very different from a laryngoscopy in the ward. Now, if I tell you the differences between both of them, they are huge. When you're intubating a patient in the operation rooms, you know, this patient is well prepared. This patient has slept the whole night. This patient is not hypoxic. This patient is empty stomach. So there are so many things that are in the OT that makes it very simple. It is a controlled environment where you are actually intubating your patient. You know, this pre-medicated, he's pre-oxygenated, and then he's in front of you. Now your patient that you are going to intubate in ICU is the one that cannot be pre-oxygenated because he's having hypoxic respiratory failure. There is very less time for pre-oxygenation if it is a cardiac arrest. If it is a patient who is having a GCS is low on their side, you cannot keep doing bag mask ventilation because it can be a problem because he may aspirate and die. So you have to be quick. That means you have lost one of your very important things, that is pre-oxygenation. You are not optimum at your pre-oxygenation. Second thing, when these patients are critically ill, you know, their stomachs are not moving. Since their stomachs are not moving, there is always a chance that what he has eaten 8-12 hours back is still lying in the stomach. Okay, what is we have given 8-12 hours back is still in the stomach. It is not going down. So they are full stomach. They are not empty stomach. They are not empty stomach. Whereas a patient in the OT will probably be empty stomach. Okay, now this person is full stomach. That means when you give certain drugs, you know, and you are kept the patient supine, there is going to be a natural gravity that is going to cause the food to come out of your esophagus into the lungs and cause aspiration. And moreover, you are giving certain drugs which actually increases the pressure in the abdomen and thus causes an increase in aspiration. We will come to that. Okay, clear on this till now? So that is the difference between critical ill intubation versus ward intubation. That is why in order to learn intubation in ICU, it is an extremely difficult task. You can learn intubation in the anesthesia room, but learning intubation in an ICU is an extremely difficult task. That is why you have to be, you have to do, if in an anesthesia room you require 5 days to intubate and learn, here you'll require 50 days to intubate and learn, because this intubation in an ICU is not just putting the tube. Intubation in the ICU is the process that is required in order to facilitate a tube going through the vocal cords without the patient crashing. That is why intubation in the ICU is very different from intubation in the operation theaters, right? Okay, so when I say rapid sequence intubation, we'll come to the modifications of rapid sequence intubation. But if I ask what is rapid sequence intubation, it just means facilitating the tube going through the vocal cords in a rapid manner, sequential manner, and after paralysis. These are three things that are there in rapid sequence intubation. In a rapid manner, okay, quickly, in a sequence and with a paralytic agent. This is the meaning of rapid sequence intubation. Now, I'm not going into how we will do it in critically ill patient. I'm just going to go for the basics and then I will tell you the modifications that come in critically ill patient. Okay, now in any rapid sequence intubation, when we say rapid sequence intubation, we are looking at 10 minutes. We are looking at 10 minutes total. Okay, by definition, it would be somewhere around 10 minutes. Now I will explain to you the breakup of those 10 minutes. In the first 10 minutes, first 5 minutes of those 10 minutes, we are supposed to pre-oxygenate the patient. Okay, clear on this? In the first 10 minutes, we are going to pre-oxygenate. So as I told you, it is a 10-minute procedure. One minute, just hold on. Yeah, internet. So this airway management technique is a 10-minute procedure. When we are when in this 10 minutes, the first 5 minutes goes for pre-oxygenation. What is the meaning of pre-oxygenation? Preparation and pre-oxygenation means you are preparing the task for rapid sequence intubation, which includes what all? Which includes adequate position of the patient. When you say adequate position, means facilitating by putting a head ring. Okay, it means getting the drugs ready. It means getting the EtCO2 ready, keeping your 3 people ready. The 3 people is one who's on the head end, one who's helping the head end, and the third is the one who's giving the drugs. Okay, you are planning the whole event. That means whenever you start a rapid sequence intubation, you first plan. You tell the people that I am going to do this. Please keep this ready. So the preparation will involve drugs, equipment, people, and place. 4 things: drug, equipment, people, and place. So the drug, what are the drugs you're going to give? That you have to be very clear. Equipment, what is the equipment you are going to be using? That you have to be very clear on. People and place. And if it is a trauma situation, protecting the cervical spine. Okay, protect cervical spine. This comes in when there's trauma. So positioning is something that can be done during this phase or after paralysis or induction. So positioning is the next thing. Then the third thing is pre-treatment. When I say pre-treatment, means I want to give all the medicines that I want to give time. Okay. So the first 10 minutes will go in pre-oxygenation. Clear on this now? Clear on this? Am I clear? Okay. Now, whenever I'm going to start my preparation, there are 4 things that I will always remember. LOSC. LOSC. L is laryngoscopes. That means 2 working laryngoscopes. When I say L means laryngoscopes, that means 2 working laryngoscopes. O is oxygen. Oxygen and AMBU, that is. S is suction. And E is EtCO2. So these 4 things are a must. Laryngoscopes, 2 working laryngoscopes, oxygen, suction, and EtCO2 monitor. Now, when I say laryngoscopes, we need both the 2 working laryngoscopes. So the head end person will look for these 4 things. So the main person who's doing the intubation will first look for laryngoscope, 2 working laryngoscope testing yourself, oxygen supply that comes in from into an AMBU bag or into the BiPAP machine. Okay, so you need 2 oxygen connectors, one that goes into the AMBU and one that goes into the ventilator. That is why if you look at the pendants, there are always 2 oxygens. If you look at the pendants in the ICU, there are 2 oxygens. One oxygen is so that you can apply it to the ventilator, and the second oxygen is so that it applies to the AMBU bag. So the AMBU bag should always be there. So oxygen and AMBU goes together. Okay, oxygen AMBU attached to an oxygen flow meter. All right. The third thing is suction. When I say suction, it does not mean the small patla suction. It means the Yankur suction. You need a Yankur suction. The small suctions are not going to work. Food particles will occlude it. You can't use normal suction. You have to use Yankur suction. The big suction is what you're supposed to use. Yankur suction. All right. And the third thing is working EtCO2 ready. Okay, now working EtCO2 ready is very important. You don't look for the EtCO2 after you have put the tube through. It has to be working before. So now in this scenario where we are working in COVID, it is a very difficult task to actually understand this. But in a normal scenario, what I would do, I would put the EtCO2 in my near my mouth. I would blow into it. If I blow into it, I can see a waveform. That means it's a working EtCO2. In our cases, what you should do if the patient is on, if you're AMBUing the patient, apply the EtCO2 to your AMBU. Apply the EtCO2 to your AMBU, and when you're pressing, you can actually see the waveforms going up and down. Okay, if the waveform is slightly waveform comes, means your EtCO2 is working. Clear on this? Clear on this? So this comes as the basic. Now when we talk about EtCO2, we also talk about endotracheal tube. We also talk about endotracheal tube. Now, what is the endotracheal tube that is required there? You need 7, 7.5, ideally 7.5, 8 and 8.5. 7, 7.5, 8 and 8.5. These are the endotracheal tubes. However, whenever you're going to intubate a patient, you should have the range starting from 6 to 9. Always. The ones that are kept besides you would be, for a male will be 8 and 8.5, for a female will be 7 and 7.5. But you should have the range starting from 6 onwards till 9. It's very important because at times if the tube doesn't go and you need a smaller tube, the smallest tube available is 6 number. Right? That's why we need this. Now, when I say endotracheal tube, in the same breath, you have to talk about stellate, metallic stellate. So whenever you are at the head end and you're taking care of the endotracheal tube as well as the laryngoscope as well as oxygen and suction, the important thing that to look at is the stellate. Now the stellate has a technique to put in. You have to lubricate the stellate, then put the stellate inside, and the stellate has to be at a straight angle. It has to be completely straight up to the cuff. It cannot be curved. The stellate has to be straight up to the cuff, and at the cuff it has to be having a 15 to 20 degrees tilt. That is what it requires. The stellate, there is a mistake done by many doctors. Once they put the stellate, they make it round. They make the whole endotracheal tube round. That is wrong. That is completely wrong. The stellate, when you put in the endotracheal tube, it is to be looked as a hockey stick. The endotracheal tube should look like a hockey stick. When I say hockey stick, means it's got straight, completely straight till the cuff, and from the cuff it has to be tilted by around 15 to 20 degrees. Am I clear on this? Am I clear? So the stellate has to be lubricated, it has to be inserted, and after it is inserted, it has to be just at the cuff only. It has to be bent at an angle of 15 to 20 degrees, not more than that. That is how you're going to use your endotracheal tube. Keep ready. And often what you need to also do is wherever your cuff is lying, no cuff, आपका जो cuff है, wherever the pilot balloon is there, attach a syringe over there. Attach a 10 cc syringe over there, because once it goes inside, you inflate the cuff. You don't search for a syringe at that time. You understand? Once the tube goes inside, you just press the syringe so that your cuff is inflated. You don't search for a syringe. Unfortunately, this always occurs that the syringe is not applied. The syringe has so that the moment, because once you apply an empty syringe, it's not heavy. It doesn't make the tube heavy. And then once you put the tube, just inflate the cuff. Okay, that is how. So in the preparation of an endotracheal tube, lignocaine, endotracheal tube, stellate, and syringe goes in the preparation of a endotracheal tube. Now, when I talk about airway, we are not only talking about endotracheal tube. Once we talk about endotracheal tube, your tray, your intubation tray should have all the 3 sizes of airways, and it should have a laryngeal mask airway, and it's very essential to have this tracheostomy set besides that. So there is going to be a tracheostomy set, there is going to be a laryngeal mask airway, and there is going to be all the different sizes of airways, oropharyngeal airways. Okay, also called as a Goodell's airways. So when you are at the head end and you are planning the intubation, what you are supposed to be asking is the LMA ready, is the airway ready, is the laryngeal mask airway ready, is the tracheostomy set there. You've seen when I come to intubate, I ask these questions. Have you seen that? I regularly ask these questions. You have to make it a practice. Okay, you have to make it a practice to ask these questions, because if you are at the head end and unfortunately you are not able to pass the tube, the only thing left for you is an LMA and an oral airway. That is going to help you. Tracheostomy is something that will take time to master. Okay, but it needs to be present over there. Okay, so tracheostomy, oral airway, and tracheostomy set needs to be present over there. Clear on this? Am I clear? Now let's come to now since we have finished the equipment part of the story. Have you understood the equipment still now? Understood the equipments? Okay. Now we come to the induction part of it. When you say rapid sequence induction, it means now the first 5 minutes have gone in pre-oxygenation and preparation. Okay, the first 5 minutes has gone in. You understood now why I'm telling you this timing? This 5 minutes has gone in pre-oxygenation and preparation. When I say pre-oxygenation, what does that mean? Normal scenario, that means if the patient is in the OT, we will tell the patient to take 6 vital capacity breaths. I don't know whether you have I've given you my book. In my book, all this is written. Have you seen my book? Have you read my book on mechanical ventilation? If you, Niharika, got my book? No.
No, sir.
Kanchan?
Sir, I have got it, but I have to read it.
Read it, read it, read it. There is very small book on mechanical. Niharika, I will just ask Annapurna. We will try to organize a book for you. Okay. I have written a book on mechanical ventilation. The respiratory therapist also should read it. Huh? It is available on Amazon, but I'll try to figure out whether I can get it free of cost. Okay. Ruchika also needs to have that book. It is there with me. Actually, the problem is these books are lying, but it is lying inside that cupboard, and the cupboard is inside the COVID room. That is the problem. If see, anyways, if you all don't get that book from the cupboard, no, you all purchase it on Amazon. It is very cheap. It is 275 rupees only, some 300, 400 rupees. It actually is lying inside the COVID cupboard. But वो COVID cupboard अभी खोल नहीं पाएंगे हम लोग. अंदर वो COVID ICU में. You all purchase it. It is called MCQs in mechanical ventilation. Okay, it's called MCQs in mechanical ventilation. You can purchase it from Amazon directly. Respiratory therapist, please purchase it. Any respiratory therapist is hearing? Anyone is there? Okay, you tell them. Ruchika, you are there inside, right?
Yes, sir. Akash is here.
Akash, so what I suggest is, man, you just download this book from Amazon or somewhere, I don't know, MCQs in mechanical ventilation. It is very cheap. Actually, we have the books, but it is lying inside that COVID room. Okay, I think rather than waiting for that, now just take it out because it's a very good book that you'll be able to read quickly. It has got MCQs in mechanical ventilation. All right. So now that we talked about the timing that we have, the first 5 minutes has gone in pre-oxygenation. Normally, what is pre-oxygenation? You know, normally if somebody holds a mask on me and I breathe heavily, good inspiration and good expiration for 6 minutes, for 6 breaths, that is equal to good pre-oxygenation. 6 vital capacity breaths is equal to good pre-oxygenation. Now, if this patient in the ICU could take 6 vital capacity breaths, he'll probably not require intubation. Okay, so that is why in ICU it is very difficult to do that pre-oxygenation. So what do? In ICU we do a modification which we'll come to later on, but you must understand this way that in pre-oxygenation in usual situations, it is applying a mask for at least 5 minutes, applying a non-rebreather mask for 5 minutes, or vital capacity breaths, 6 vital capacity breaths is something that you need to give for pre-oxygenation. Clear on this? So the first 5 minutes has gone in first 5 minutes has gone in preparation. Next 3 minutes has gone in pre-oxygenation. Next 3 minutes have gone in pre-oxygenation. So first 5 minutes has gone in preparation. Next 3 minutes has gone in pre-oxygenation, and then comes the pre-treatment. Okay, in the pre-treatment, now we need to the pre-treatment we've done. We need to understand about what is the ideal induction agent. Okay. Unfortunately, there is no ideal induction agent. Unfortunately, there is no ideal induction agent. Okay, so the what should be an ideal induction agent? That which will smoothly and quickly put the patient to sleep. Number one, very smoothly and quickly it will make the patient sleep. That is the first step that is required in an ideal induction agent. The ideal induction agent should also provide some pain relief. Okay, the ideal induction agent should not reduce the blood supply to the brain and the heart, and it should be very quickly reversible and have no side effects. So if somebody asks which is the ideal rapid sequence intubation agent, unfortunately there is no ideal one. So the ideal one is what all? It should be smooth, it should be quick, it should also provide analgesia, it should maintain blood supply to the brain and the heart, it should be reversible and should not have any side effects. Right, so there is really no ideal rapid sequence intubation drug. Okay, so there are many that we are going to use and we should know, and these agents are called as induction agents. Okay, induction agents. Now when I say pre-treatment, what is the meaning of pre-treatment? When I say when we say pre-oxygenation for 5 minutes, we said preparation for 5 minutes, we said pre-oxygenation for 3 minutes or 6 vital capacity breaths. Okay, then I said pre-treatment. When I say pre-treatment for 2 to 3 minutes, it means giving Fortwin. You understand? It means in our settings, it means giving Fortwin. In OT settings, it means giving lignocaine, atropine, things like that. Okay, so pre-treatment is, in OT, they will give glycopyrrolate to reduce secretions. They will give Rantac to prevent acidity. They will give Perinom to move everything down. In Sign, we used to call it GRP, glycorantac Perinom. We used to call it that in Sign. This was pre-treatment. Okay, but in our ICU, the pre-treatment is basically Fortwin. And why is this you are giving at this after preparation? Is because Fortwin will take 2 to 3 minutes to work. It will take 2 to 3 minutes to work. It is not going to act immediately. That is why in the pre-treatment, we are giving Fortwin 15 milligrams and waiting. We don't want to give the full 30 milligrams. We want to give 15 milligrams and then after 1 or 2 minutes, give another 15 milligrams. You understand? So that is why preparation is 5 minutes, pre-oxygen is 3 minutes, pre-treatment is 2 minutes. Pre-treatment is 2 minutes. So how much have we gone through? 5 plus 3 is 8. 5 plus 3 is 8 and you have barely a minute more to intubate. You have barely a minute more to intubate. Got the point? That means in 1 minute time, I have to deliver a drug, a paralytic agent and intubate. That's how fast it's going to be. Okay. So first 5 minutes have gone in preparation. Next 3 minutes have gone in preparation, pre-oxygenation, and the next 2 minutes is pre-treatment and intubation. So that means once you have pre-oxygenated a patient, you give 50 milligrams of Fortwin, you wait, and in the next minute you have to give an induction agent. Will be fast, quick, put the patient to sleep and induce analgesia quickly so that we can, and it is very reversible. So the induction agents that we know of are ketamine, etomidate, fentanyl, midazolam, propofol, and thiopental. So these are the induction agents you should know. On your exam table, this will be kept. You will not miss out this. This will be there on every exam table, nursing or doctors. This will be there on every exam table. So ketamine, etomidate, fentanyl, midazolam, propofol, and thiopental. And it is important that you know the dose of each so that when you are going to intubate a patient, you should be ready to tell the nurse, give this. The nurse should know the dose pre only. So nurses and doctors should know this doses of these drugs by heart. Okay, now what is the dose of ketamine? The dose of ketamine is 2 milligram per kilogram. Remember this, 2 milligram per kilogram. So if you have a 50 kilo individual, you need 100 milligrams of ketamine ready. Okay, and you must understand this is a protocol. All induction agents excepting midazolam will be prepared in 10 cc syringes. You will not use any other syringe. All induction agents will be prepared in 10 cc syringes. No other syringe to be used. This is a protocol. Okay, that is because subconsciously also you should not give the wrong drug. Okay, so all induction agents will be in 10 cc. Shraddha, you're hearing now? Shraddha?
Yes, sir.
I hope she's, yeah, remember this, okay? All induction agents. So what is the dose of ketamine? The dose of ketamine is 2 milligram per kilogram. So if it's a person who is more than 70 kilos, you need 150 milligrams ready. You need 150 milligrams. So that is why it is made in 10 cc syringes. Remember this. Okay, ketamine is 2 milligram per kilogram. Etomidate is 0.3 milligram per kilogram. 0.3 milligram per kilogram. Okay, so on an average, patients require somewhere around 18 to 20 milligrams of etomidate. Okay, 0.3 milligram per kilogram is 18 to 20 milligrams of etomidate. So when you're telling the nurse or the nurse is drawing up, she should understand, you should tell. So it is all, remember this, in induction, it is always a two-way closed loop communication. Whenever you are communicating in critical care, it is closed loop. So say, for example, I am going to tell the nurse, I will say, nurse, prepare 150 milligrams of ketamine. The nurse will say, yes, sir, I am taking 150 milligrams of ketamine. That is how it closes the loop. You can't just nod your head. That is not the way it is done. It has to be heard. Okay, so that's why it's called closed loop communication. So similarly, when you're talking of etomidate, you're going to say, nurse, please draw 18 to 20 milligrams of etomidate. Okay, why is that 18 to 20? Because 0.3 milligram per kilogram. So you say, nurse, draw 20 milligrams of etomidate. Simple. You understand? And this has to go via the 10 cc syringe, no other syringe. Okay. Propofol is always coded at 2 milligram per kilogram. So remember, ketamine and propofol is 2 milligram per kilogram. Remember this. Ketamine is and propofol is 2 milligram per kilogram. Okay. So the propofol is also 2 milligram per kilogram. Thiopentone is 3 milligram per kilogram, 3 to 5 milligram per kilogram. So you can remember 3 milligram per kilogram. Okay, 3 to 5 milligram per kilogram is thiopentone. Okay, and fentanyl, thiopentone, you're not going to use it, so don't worry about it, but it is kept on the table, it's kept as a powder. Okay, so 3 milligram per kilogram thiopentone. And if you don't have any of these agents, that means you don't have ketamine, you don't have etomidate, you don't have, one more drug is midazolam. Midazolam is similar to etomidate, 0.3 milligram per kilogram. Okay, so etomidate and midazolam is 0.3 milligram per kilogram. Ketamine is 2 milligram per kilogram. Right, propofol is 2 milligram per kilogram. Thiopentone is 3 milligram per kilogram. And if none of these agents are coming and you have to use only fentanyl, if you can use only fentanyl, you can use only fentanyl also. It's not an advisable agent, but if you're going to use only fentanyl, the dose is 2 to 10 microgram per kilogram. 2 to 10. Okay. समझ में आ रहा है? So 2 to 10 means 500 micrograms you may require for intubation. 500 micrograms. Right? So 2 to 10 microgram per kilogram is what is required for intubation purposes. Fentanyl dose. Clear on this? It may be required 2 to 10 microgram. Clear on the doses till now? So when you are, sorry, you can.
So fentanyl इतना दे सकते हैं 500 mg.
Yes, yes. So that is the intubation dose. Intubation for induction. Induction dose. Otherwise, fentanyl we are using as analgesic. When you're using an analgesic, you don't require so much of doses. But when you're going to intubate your patients, you may require somewhere between 2 to 10 microgram per kilogram. Since you have to titrate that, मतलब तुम पहले 200 दोगे, फिर 200 दोगे, फिर 100 दोगे, ऐसा you will be titrating it. That is not a good agent. That is not a good, because as I told you, what is the ideal agent? It should be quick. It should be smooth. It should induce sedation or unconsciousness quickly. This will not do that. Fentanyl will not do that. That is why it's not an ideal agent. Ideal agents are etomidate, ketamine. Why etomidate is one of the most ideal agent? Etomidate is one of the most ideal agent because it is completely stable. It does not cause bradycardia. It does not cause hypotension. It does not cause anything. So that is why etomidate is one of the most stable drugs to be given during intubation. However, etomidate is a very poor drug in sepsis because of the fact that it causes adrenal suppression. It causes adrenal suppression. That is the reason that etomidate falls down in sepsis, and sepsis is one of our major diagnoses in our ICU. So etomidate becomes a problem. Okay, ketamine, wonderful drug. It solves two purposes. One purpose is that it looks after induction. Second purpose, it looks after analgesia also. Unfortunately, it is not as quick as etomidate or propofol. Etomidate or propofol will put the patient to sleep in 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Whereas ketamine will require 60 to 90 seconds. That is 1.5 minutes. As I told you, our first 5 minutes have gone in preparation. Next 3 minutes have gone in pre-treatment and pre-oxygenation. 2 minutes are required in pre-treatment induction. So if it is going to take 1.5 minutes, it is not rapid sequence. You understand, it is very difficult. That is why ketamine is not a great drug. However, we may tend to use ketamine if the rest of the drugs are not. That is why there is no ideal induction drug. You understand, there is no ideal induction drug. So ketamine is 2 milligram per kilogram. But you must remember in the back of your mind that if I give ketamine, I have to wait for 1 to 1.5 minutes before I can go and put my tube through. Clear on this? Clear on this? So ketamine is 2 milligram per kilogram. Doses are clear? And this all has to be prepared in 10 cc. The only drug in induction agent that is prepared in 5 cc is midazolam. The only drug that we are going to use in induction agent as is midazolam, and that is given at 0.3 milligram per kilogram. Okay. So we don't want to use midazolam for our patients because 0.3 milligram per kilogram is how much? The dose actually 0.1 to 0.3. So 0.1 into 5 is 50 is 5 milligrams. That is why we want it in 5 cc syringe. The dose of midazolam is 0.1 to 0.3 milligram per kilogram. Similarly, as I told you, we need something drug that are going to be quick. We need drugs that are going to be smooth. Midazolam is not quick. It is not smooth. You understand? And that is the reason that midazolam is not a great drug to be used. The great drug that we will be using in our ICU is going to be etomidate or ketamine. Right? And that is the drug that we're going to use. Midazolam is not a great drug because I told you it's not quick. This will take close to 1 to 2 minutes before the patient goes down. More than that rather. So 0.1 milligram per kilogram is to 0.3 milligram per kilogram is the ideal dose for midazolam. That is why midazolam is taken in 5 cc. So the only syringe for induction that we will be using would be midazolam in 5 cc. The rest all syringes would be in 10 cc. Clear? Rest all induction will be 10 cc. Now the next drug, when you say rapid sequence intubation, means rapid induction and rapid paralysis. It has to be quickly in 1 minute each. That is a rapid induction and rapid paralysis. So the next drug that we will be using is paralytic drug. And the paralytic drug that we use to get good intubation conditions is succinylcholine, also called as scoline. Also called as choline. Now the dose of choline is usually 1.5 to 2 milligram per kilogram. So remember 2 milligram. जैसे fentanyl 2 था, जैसे propofol ketamine 2 था, जैसे प्रोपोफॉल 2 था, even केटामीन is 2 milligram per kilogram. So actually the ideal dose is 1.5, but 2 milligram per kilogram is acceptable. So 2 milligram per kilogram is what you're supposed to give when you're using succinylcholine or succinylcholine. Clear on this? Clear on this? Okay. There are two other drugs that you can use for paralytic agents. One is called as rocuronium and the other is called as vecuronium. Now both these drugs do not induce paralysis quickly. Vecuronium will take close to 2 to 3 minutes. Rocuronium will take close to 1.5 to 2 minutes. So both of them are not great drugs during this time, because you can understand when you are actually paralyzing your patient, your gag reflex is gone. The patient has a chance of aspiration. In that 2 minutes time, if he aspirates, he's dead. He's dead. You understand? He's gone. It's very difficult to save that patient. Okay, especially so imagine a patient who's bleeding from his esophagus and esophageal varices. Say he's got esophageal varices, for example, and because of esophageal varices, he is having bleeding. At that stage, if you go ahead and you try to intubate your patient and take some 2-3 minutes, all the blood will come from the esophagus and go into the lungs. That is why it has to be quick. And that is why the quickest agent that we have now is Scoline. And that is why 2 milligram per kilogram Scoline is given rapid push. You understand, na? Rapid push. So in rapid sequence intubation, you will have again I repeat, preparation for 5 minutes, which includes every instrument and drugs keeping ready. Pre-oxygenation for 3 minutes. In the next 2 minutes, induction and paralysis has to go together. Induction and paralysis. So induction goes quickly, paralytic agent goes quickly. In the preparatory phase, you may want to give small dose of Fortwin. Okay, we want to give small dose of Fortwin in the preparation phase. So you understand now how difficult it is now. Okay, clear. Now let us see the drawbacks of each of those induction agents. Okay, what are the drawbacks? What are the drawbacks? Now, ketamine, what is the drawback of ketamine? So the drawback of ketamine is, what are the good things? The good things about ketamine is, even if the patient's blood pressure is low, ketamine is a very good drug because it may take the blood pressure up. Okay, it will not cause any raised ICP. You can use it for traumatic brain injury. There is no problem. You can use it for traumatic brain injury. If the patient has got asthma, it is a fantastic drug because it causes bronchodilation. So in an asthmatic patient, I will not even think I will give ketamine. I will not even think I will give ketamine in an asthmatic patient. Okay, so ketamine is a great drug for asthmatic patients for induction agents because 2 milligram per kilogram will induce bronchodilation, will keep the patient hemodynamically stable. But what is the problem? What is the problem with ketamine? So the problem with ketamine is sometimes it causes increased secretions. Sometimes it may cause increased secretions, and the tachycardia that it causes, the blood pressure rise that it causes may be harmful for a cardiac patient. Okay, it may cause problems with respect to blood pressure and tachycardia. Clear on this? And third thing is, you probably don't want to use it if the patient has got glaucoma. If the patient has glaucoma, we don't want to use ketamine. Clear? So understood the importance? The importance of ketamine is that it is extremely good for bronchodilation. It is extremely good if the patient is hemodynamically unstable, but the drawbacks are it may cause increased secretion, okay, and it may cause hypertension and tachycardia, which might be dangerous for cardiac patients. Clear on this? Now, what about propofol? So I told you the onset of action. The onset of action takes around 1.5 minutes. So it is going to take 1.5 minutes. How do you understand that the drug has completed action? Okay, Niharika, how do you understand that the drug has any of these drugs has completed action? Now, when you're saying 60 to 90 seconds, it may be 60 seconds, it may be 90 seconds. When you're looking at ketamine, it may take 1.5 minutes before the patient goes, when the patient gets induced. When we call it in anesthesia terms, we call it induced. How do you know the patient is induced? So to know the patient is induced, you need to do something called as an eyelash reflex. Okay, now what is the eyelash reflex? The eyelash reflex is, see, if it is my eyes, I will pick up the eye. I'll pick up the eye like this, and I will just move my fingers over the eyelash. When I move the fingers over the eyelash, if the patient blinks, the patient has not gone under, you will have to wait, or you have to give an extra dose. One of the two. Clear on this? Eyelash reflex. It is called as loss of eyelash reflex. Right? So if I give ketamine 1 minute later, I will not before 1 minute. 1 minute is a good time when you're actually going to intubate a patient. 1 minute is a long time. If you think about it, 1 minute is a very long time. You know, वो हरी में हम लोग कितना fast करने की कोशिश करते हैं कि we might not get the ideal intubation conditions. You understand? So when you're intubating a patient, you're giving ketamine, wait for 1 minute, test the eyelash reflex. If the eyelash reflex is gone, then you tell the doctor to give a paralytic agent. Okay, so if you are looking at ketamine, 1 minute later, you look for eyelash reflex. At 90 seconds, if there is no improvement in eyelash reflex, you probably need another dose of ketamine. Your dose is lower. Your dose is not adequate. Clear on this? You don't directly give paralytic agent. 2 milligram per kilogram देने के बाद, if at 60 seconds eyelash reflex is not lost, you're waiting till 90 seconds. At 90 seconds, if the eyelash reflex is not lost, you'll have to give a redose of ketamine. Half the dose you'll have to give at least. Clear on this? Clear on this? Okay, now when the same thing occurs with propofol, but what you have to remember when doing propofol is the onset of action is 15 seconds, 15 seconds. It's only 15 seconds. The moment you give propofol, 15 seconds the patient is going to go under. So eyelash reflex has to be checked. So the person who's on the airway actually checks for eyelash reflex. Clear on this? We are not going to talk midazolam because midazolam will take 1.5 minutes, just like ketamine. Okay, midazolam also 1.5 minutes. Etomidate and propofol, both are white solutions. Both of them are 15 seconds. Both of them are 15 seconds. Propofol and etomidate, both are white solutions and both are 15 seconds. Midazolam and ketamine, both are transparent solutions and both will take close to around 60 seconds to 90 seconds. Remember it like this. Clear on this? White and transparent solutions. Clear? Am I clear till now? Okay, so now when you talk about propofol, what are the problems with propofol? The problems with propofol are unbelievable. I mean, what happens is it is not a drug that is going to be used in ICU care. First of all, okay, why? Because it causes extreme hemodynamic instability as a result of
सर आवाज नहीं आ रहा है.
Yeah. Okay. So when we talk about what are we talking about? I forgot. क्या बात कर रहे थे हम लोग? Propofol. So propofol causes bradycardia, causes hypotension. So it's not a great drug to use in ICU settings. So tell me one condition in ICU where you will use propofol. So I told you it is not a great drug in ICU, but there is one condition in which you would want to use propofol. Can you tell me which is that condition? So the only condition where you'd want to use propofol is in a hypertensive bleed. In a hypertensive bleed. Because what is happening in a hypertensive bleed? I want to intubate this patient as quickly as possible. Number one. Number two is his blood. Normally a hypertensive bleed will have a blood pressure of 250, 220. You want that blood pressure to come down. Okay. Clear on this? And you need something that will protect the brain. One of the things that protects the brain is propofol. Propofol is a neuroprotectant. Propofol is a neuroprotectant. So in a patient who has IC bleed, I'm not talking of trauma. Trauma में क्या हो सकता है? There can be bleeding anywhere else and there can be hypotension because of that. Okay, so but in a specific IC bleed, usually the blood pressure is on the higher side, and that is why the drug of choice at that case, if the blood pressure is 200 plus, is propofol. Clear on this? So you must understand propofol otherwise is not supposed to be used in the ICU. Clear on this? It is an extremely difficult drug to be used, and it is, but the importance it is very short acting, very short acting. ठीक है, अगर तुमने बोला अरे यार अंडर नहीं हो रहा, थोड़ा propofol दे दो, थोड़ा propofol में patient can have hypotension and collapse. You understand? So it is not a great drug in the ICU. It is a procedural drug more. Induction drug में it is very favored in the OT, but it is not favored in the ICU. Clear on this? Etomidate. Now, etomidate is suitable for almost every indication in the ICU. Almost every indication in ICU, etomidate is kind of is suitable. The only thing that it can cause is adrenal suppression. It can cause some amount of adrenal suppression. Okay, but etomidate is probably one of the easiest drugs to use in the ICU. So ketamine is one great drug. Etomidate is a great drug, but etomidate being very quick. Etomidate being very quick on action for rapid sequence intubation, etomidate seems to score over ketamine. Ketamine takes 60 to 90 seconds. Etomidate takes barely around 15 seconds. That is why etomidate is a great drug. The only problem that we have is adrenal suppression. Etomidate does not cause hemodynamic instability at all. So it's a great drug to be used. 0.3 milligram per kilogram is a drug that you have to use. Coming to paralytic agents, the best paralytic agent that you must talk about is scoline. Okay, scoline is supposed to be used at 1.5 milligram per kilogram. Okay, the only place where you will actually increase the dose is in myasthenia gravis. In myasthenia gravis patients, you may require a higher dose. Okay, but ideally myasthenia gravis patients don't require any dose, frankly speaking. They even with induction agent, they to become so relaxed that you don't have a problem. But why is it important to relax the patient? When I'm saying relax the patient, I am looking at the vocal cords relaxing and going apart. The vocal cords relaxing and going apart. Okay, that is very important because if you try to force your tube through the vocal cords, lifelong this patient can have vocal cord palsy. Lifelong you may injure the vocal cords. Your one intubation will prevent an extubation, will make the patient go into tracheostomy. That is why you should have the vocal cords to be parted apart. And the best paralytic agent that we have in this case is succinylcholine. It gives the best intubating conditions. It gives the best intubating conditions. Okay, the onset of action is close to 45 seconds. So what is the process when you're actually paralyzing your patient? First is after your induction agent, the eyelash reflex should go. Sabse pehle. The eyelash reflex should go. When the eyelash reflex goes, that is when scoline goes inside. Okay. When scoline goes inside, before you give scoline, the chest up to the leg should be open and exposed. Why should it be open and exposed? Because the moment you give scoline, there will be some fasciculations that you will notice. But however, in critically ill patients, you may not notice it. What do these fasciculations tell you? These fasciculations tell you that probably the effect of scoline has come. You know, after the fasciculation come and go, probably the effect of scoline has arrived. That is why we want to undress the patient and look at those fasciculations. Clear on this? What will happen if you try to intubate without those fasciculations going? What will happen is if you try to intubate these patients without the fasciculation going, there will be a high chance of the patient going into intense laryngospasm. That can't be relieved. You understand? He will go into intense, as I told you, when you put a laryngoscope in the mouth, there is a incision equivalent pain. That means equivalent pain to an incision in the abdomen. That is the kind of pain you're going to have. Okay, that is the kind of, and that will elicit a reflex, and that reflex will cause extreme laryngospasm. Am I clear on this? And that is the reason that you have to, the dose of scoline has to be given such, you have to undress the patient, look for the fasciculations should come and it should go. The fasciculation should come and it should go. When the fasciculation come and go, that is when the time you will say that the patient is kind of relaxed. Now he is ideal for laryngoscopy. Clear on this? Am I clear on this? So this will take close to 45 seconds to 60 seconds. 60 seconds. So remember 60 seconds. Do not be in a hurry to put that laryngoscope in the mouth. By doing so, you may not get good intubation conditions. And instead of having one first pass success, you will have 4 or 5 attempts and the patient will not get intubated. Clear? So to get extremely good intubation conditions, you need to wait and do clinical work. Just don't do anything. That is wrong. That is very, very wrong. Once you give scoline, wait for 45 seconds. You have to wait. Okay. After 45 seconds, watch the score. If you find the fasciculation come and go, you still wait for 45 seconds. Okay. So what is the problems you might face in these cases? So what is happening now? समझ लो तुमने स्कोलिन दिया, तुमको लगता है रिलैक्स नहीं हुआ, सेकेंड डोज देने को कोशिश किया. Don't try to do that. There is a very high, if you want to do that, be very careful because there may be bradycardia, extreme bradycardia. If you give scoline the second time, there can be extreme bradycardia. So be careful. That is why you have to intubate rapid sequence intubation in the first attempt. Okay, so don't try to then you'll try to intubate, you'll not get good intubation conditions, and then you try to give scoline, patient go to laryngospasm, again scoline, all this. We don't want to go into all this. And that second time scoline will go into bradycardia. More the bradycardia, more the hyperkalemia, more the fasciculations. Okay, all these problems will occur. So it is not something that we want to do properly. That is why when you're giving scoline, remember, wait for 45 to 60 seconds only. Look for whether the patient has got relaxed, then put the laryngoscope, then you'll be able to intubate easily. Now, what is something you must remember when you're giving scoline? When you're giving scoline, you must remember that you have intubated a patient who is in distress. You have intubated a patient who is in distress. very soon when his respiratory system again starts working, he will be again in distress. You have not done anything more. You have just put a tube in. Okay. And now with the presence of the tube, his distress will be at least 10 times. Are you understanding? Huh? Unfortunately, with scoline, the effect is only for 6 to 10 minutes. Unfortunately, the scoline effect lasts only for 6 to 10 minutes. Since it lasts for this works both ways for us. 6 minutes is good because after 6 minutes, if by any chance you're not able to intubate, the patient will start breathing. You understand? The patient will start breathing. So it's kind of a protection for us. That's why scoline is a great drug. All right. But what is the other part of corollary to that? Once the patient starts breathing, he starts getting awake, he will start fighting the ventilator. That is why the moment you have put the tube through, you have seen your EtCO2, the next statement that you tell the nurse is start the patient on sedative and give the patient a long-acting muscle relaxant. That means Vecuron. All right. So the moment you have put the tube in, you have inflated the cuff and you have visualized your EtCO2 in 6 breaths. After 6 breaths, the next statement that you tell your nurse is, sister, start the patient on dexmedetomidine and give the patient 8 milligrams Vecuron. If you don't do that, in the next 6 minutes, the patient will pull off the tube and start again getting distressed. This is what is going to occur. Okay, that is why 6 minutes time under you have to do this. Now 6 minutes is a very small time. It's actually a very small time. By the time you are tube डाल दिया, तुमने check कर दिया, फिर उसके बाद तुमने tie कर दिया, उसमें 6 minutes चला जाता है. उसके बीच में, that is why in your preparation phase, when you are preparing, at that time only keep Vecuron 8 milligrams loaded, keep dexmedetomidine loaded, keep it ready. Okay, dexmedetomidine and Vecuron, keep it ready. So nurse has to keep the dexmedetomidine ready, and the Vecuron ready. Now, why is it so essential with dexmedetomidine to start at pre-preparation? Because dexmedetomidine is not an immediately acting drug. You can't give dexmedetomidine as a bolus. It has to be given as an infusion. Dexmedetomidine cannot induce sedation immediately. It will take time. Luckily, the drugs that we have given, this is the problem when you're going to use a rapidly acting drug like propofol. If you use a rapidly acting drug like propofol, it will go in and come out also as quickly. So when it comes out, patient will become awake. You understand? Patient becomes awake. That is why we want to pre-treat with fentanyl. We want to pre-treat with Fortwin so that there is a combination of drugs and the patient gives us some time. Dexmedetomidine will take close to 7 to 8 minutes before it starts working. 7 to 8 minutes. So you can imagine you must start dexmedetomidine the moment your tube goes inside and you have inflated your cuff and you have seen your EtCO2. Clear on this? Unfortunately, dexmedetomidine cannot be given as a bolus, and that is why it has to be started as an infusion. Clear on this? So if anybody asks you what is the dose of Vecuronium to begin with, it is again 0.2 milligram per kilogram. Remember this, 0.2 milligram per kilogram. So you have many drugs of the dose of 0.2 milligram per kilogram. Okay, so this is also 0.2 milligram per kilogram. This is what you're supposed to give. Why do you want to give Vecuron immediately? Because the problem is Vecuron takes 2 minutes to 3 minutes to start working. It will take 2 minutes to 3 minutes to start working. And that is why the moment you have put your endotracheal tube, you have seen your EtCO2, you have verified that the tube is in place, give the Vecuron. Otherwise, what did I tell you about scoline? It comes out in 6 minutes. It comes out in 6 minutes. So you don't have any time. That is why give the Vecuron. Vecuron will take around 2 to 3 minutes before it starts working, but it will work for a long time. Meanwhile, don't give Vecuron before only, because if the tube is not in place, this drug takes a long time to come out of the body. It goes in 2 to 3 minutes, but takes 45 minutes to 1 hour to come out of the body. So that patient will be paralyzed for 1 hour. Patient will be paralyzed for 1 hour. That is the reason that you ensure that the tube is in place by looking at 6 waveforms of EtCO2, and then you give Vecuron 0.2 milligram per kilogram. That works out to somewhere around, say 0.2 and you make it 50, it's around 8 to 10 milligrams. Okay, that's why we give 8 milligrams of Vecuron immediately. Clear on this? Clear on this? So you've understood all the various ways. Okay, now this is called as rapid sequence intubation. So again, I repeat, 10 minutes time you have for rapid sequence. The first 5 minutes is spent in preparation and pre-treatment preparation. The next 3 minutes goes in pre-oxygenation and pre-treatment. Okay, Then you have left with 2 minutes where you are going to induce and paralyze. When you're going to induce and paralyze. When you induce and paralyze, you're going to use the drugs that we just now talked about, induction agents and paralytic agents. And once you induce and paralyze, post-intubation care involves quickly giving the patient a long-acting muscle relaxant along with an induction and along with a sedative agent to be started immediately, because now we know that the duration of action of these drugs are very, very small. Clear on this? Am I clear on this? Now let's come to the difficult part of the story. Now this is what you should know as basic. This is the basic. If somebody asks you what is the meaning of rapid sequence intubation, tell me the doses of the drugs. These are the things that you're supposed to say. All right. Now let's come to a little bit difficult part of the story. Now what is the difficult part of the story? The difficult part of the story is our ICU patient. Okay. In our ICU patient, we have to modify this rapid sequence intubation. We have to modify it. And how do we modify it? We modify it depending on what kind of patient you are having. For example, you have a patient who is having hypoxic respiratory failure, like our patients in COVID. Our COVID patients are all hypoxic respiratory failure. Here, what is the important thing? There is no reserve. There is no functional residual capacity. Okay, now everyone understands the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Kanchan, you took it some time back. Okay, up to around 80, no, 88, the PO2 remains pretty okay. But 88 to 50, it will take you seconds to reach from 88 to 50. It will take you seconds. Okay, from 100 to 88, it will take maybe minutes. But without oxygen, that is, from 100 to 88, it will take you some minutes. But from 88 to 50, it will take you barely some seconds. You understand? Because that's the curve. The curve is like a sigmoid shape where 100, 90, 95, 94, 93, 88, it is flat. And then suddenly it is a dip. It is like falling off the precipice. So that's why, with respect to the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve, we have got in normal patients, they are at 100. Normal are at 100. They are at 98, 100. So they give you time. But what is our COVID patient? They are already at 90. They're already at 80. They don't give you time. They don't give you time. And that is why the intubation there is an extremely difficult task. Extremely difficult task. So how do we optimize hypoxic respiratory failure intubations? How do we optimize it? What do we normally do in COVID patients? We give them PEEP. When we give them PEEP, what happens? Their oxygenation marginally improves. They do improve, right? COVID is a very different disease, but think of another disease whose respiratory failure is there. You give them PEEP, their oxygenation kind of improves. This means to say that if you give them PEEP even prior to the intubation, there is a chance that the oxygenation will improve and will give you some amount of reserve time to put your tube through. So what do we do in hypoxic respiratory failure patients in our ICU? We also know that when the patient is propped up, okay, now this is prone, that's a different situation. But otherwise, when you're going to intubate a patient, it's going to be supine, right? So when we also know that when the patient is propped up, the lungs expand. Since the lungs expand, the chances of having better oxygenation are always there. Okay, so in our hypoxic respiratory failure patients, it is important to tweak our protocol of rapid sequence intubation. Now, how do we tweak it? We tweak it by doing something like this. We keep them in the propped up position. All right. We continue the BiPAP. When we continue BiPAP, what are we doing? We are actually giving some PEEP. We are actually giving some PEEP. So if the patient has come from outside in respiratory distress and it is not COVID or something like some hypoxic respiratory failure, I will first put the BiPAP because I have 8 minutes of preparation and pre-oxygenation time now. In that 8 minutes of preparation and pre-oxygenation time, I will give BiPAP. When I give BiPAP, I am now giving PEEP. I am now giving pressure. Since I'm giving pressure, there is a possibility that the oxygenation will improve. This is different from the usual pre-oxygenation. When we discuss rapid sequence intubation pre-oxygenation, what did we discuss? We discussed giving the patient oxygen through NRBM for around 5 minutes to 3 minutes, or we decided 6 vital capacity breaths. What are we now talking? We're talking of hypoxic oxygenation now is going to be BiPAP. Is going to be 100% BiPAP for a period of around 3 to 5 minutes. Am I clear on this? Now we're going to add something more. Now what have we noticed? When you're giving high flow nasal cannula, you are able to give huge amount of oxygen. So now we're going to add high flow nasal cannula along with the BiPAP. That means the patient now gets is going to get a nasal prong, a normal nasal prong plus a BiPAP machine to increase whatever we can do. You understand? So before intubation, we are going to put nasal cannula plus we are going to put a BiPAP machine before the intubation. That means if the patient comes to you with hypoxic respiratory failure, I'm going to put nasal prongs plus I'm going to put a BiPAP. Okay, at 100%, and I put the nasal prongs at around some time. No, so we put it at 10 to 15 liters nasal prongs. It's not going to harm you. Okay, 10 to 15 liters you put it. Now, what is the importance of applying the nasal prongs? The importance is at the time that you are going to intubate, you are not removing the nasal prongs. Nasal prong is still on. When the nasal prong is still on, there is something called as apneic ventilation that is occurring. There is something called as apneic ventilation that is occurring during your intubation process. That means during your intubation process, the nasal prong is still throwing in air, oxygen, is still throwing in oxygen. That means even during your intubation process, in these cases, critically ill patients, you are still trying to oxygenate your patient via something called as apneic ventilation, which means ventilation in apnea when the patient is not breathing. That means after paralytics. That's why you put a nasal prongs. So whenever you are intubating your patients, you should have a nasal prong and a BiPAP. After the paralytic agent has taken place, the fasciculations are gone. When you're about to intubate your patient, you remove the BiPAP mask, but let the nasal prong remain where it is. Okay, during your intubation process. This will ensure that you have some more time in your FRC during your intubation. Clear on this? Clear on this? So this means to say, if a patient of hypoxic respiratory failure comes to you, you're going to keep the patient propped up. You're going to put a nasal prong. You're going to put a BiPAP machine. These are the three things in position that you've decided. You are going to keep a head ring ready because he's in propped up position. Once you put him down, you need to put the head ring under him. It is important to put the head ring because the position that we want to give is sniffing the morning air position. That means it is a flexion of the neck joint and atlantoaxial joint slight extension. That is how it is. Okay, so sniffing the morning air position will come only and only when you put a head ring under the head. Clear on this? So a head ring is a must when you are actually doing rapid sequence intubation. Head ring. Okay, so the head ring comes in your preparation. So that is kept besides you during that time. Head ring. Clear on this? Huh? Am I clear till now? Now, another very important thing in critically ill patient is that now this patient is going to be propped up when you're going to induce your patient, when you're giving etomidate, when you're giving ketamine, the patient is in propped up position till he loses his eyelash reflex. Now we're going to suddenly move the patient from propped up to a supine position, means this is going to involve changes in blood pressure. This is going to involve changes in blood pressure, and that is why irrespective of your patient in hypoxic respiratory failure critically ill patient, you always keep noradrenaline loaded and connected at 0.1 ml per hour. Are you understanding? You always keep NORAD ready loaded 8 milligrams 50 cc at 0.1 ml per hour attached to the line, attached to your peripheral line. Okay, you probably may not have a central line. You'll have a peripheral line. Keep it attached to your peripheral line at 0.1 ml per hour. Because in critically ill patients, you'll be keeping the patient propped up. Suddenly you have given propofol or etomidate or whatever. Suddenly the sympathetic drive is gone. When the sympathetic drive is gone, the patient suddenly will dilate. And that sudden dilatation will cause hypotension. Unknowingly, you will give fluid. Giving fluid on top of your ARDS patient means causing more ARDS. Giving fluid on top of your ARDS patient means giving more ARDS. You understand? You cannot give fluid. What you need to give? Vasopressor. And the vasopressor of choice is noradrenaline. Clear? It is noradrenaline. Clear on this? Am I clear? That is why the NORAD should be there at 0.1 ml per hour. It should be there on at 0.1 ml per hour. So the moment you keep the patient supine, okay, you can increase the NORAD if you require. The easier answer to that is to have push dose adrenaline. That is why we maintain, in the preparatory phase, we prepare push dose adrenaline. What is the meaning of push dose adrenaline? We take 1 cc of adrenaline, dilute to 10 cc, then we remove 9 cc, then we again take 10 cc normal saline. That is called as double dilution of push dose adrenaline that we want to prepare for our patients. It will be 1 microgram per cc and or 10 microgram per cc, and you can give 2 to 3 cc out of that in the event there is hypotension. Don't give fluids. Fluids will not get your blood pressure up. This is a vasodilated state. Since it's a vasodilated state, you have to vasoconstrict it. The way to vasoconstrict it is by giving vasopressors. It is not a hypovolemic state. If it was a hypovolemic state, you would give fluids. But this is not hypovolemic state. You are given a drug and that drug has caused vasodilatation. To prevent that vasodilatation, to take care of vasodilatation, you have to give a vasoconstrictor, and the vasoconstrictor that you're going to give is NORAD or adrenaline. Clear? Am I clear on this? Huh? That is why in the first tweak that we talked about on the airway is putting the nasal prong, putting the BiPAP machine. The second tweak that we talked about positioning was keeping the patient in the propped up position. The third tweak that we talked about was keeping the head ring somewhere near you, because head ring cannot be kept on the bed now. The head ring will be somewhere near you. It will be in your hand or something like that, somewhere on the side of you, or with your your assistant. It will be with the assistant, the head ring. Okay. The fifth tweak is you have started the patient on NORAD at 0.1 ml per hour already. Okay. Irrespective of the blood pressure, you have started the patient on 0.1 ml per hour. 0.1 ml per hour will keep the keep it ready for further use. 0.1 ml per hour. Okay. Now the sixth week is you are actually giving induction agent when the patient is in propped up position. When you're giving the induction in the propped up position, your eyelash reflex is slightly difficult. It is slightly difficult because the patient is sitting, you are backside. If you are short, you may not be able to reach the eyelash. So there has to be someone who's going to look at the eyelash reflex, right? And then you're going to give the patient a supine position. Clear on this? So the paralytic agent is going to come after the eyelash reflex. Once you give the paralytic agent, the patient is going to be made supine. Okay, so it's a good it has to be a good coordination of an effective and very good nurse. If the nurse is very good, your rapid sequence intubation is a song. If your nurse is not good, your rapid sequence intubation goes for a toss, because you cannot run about. You cannot run about. You have to be at head end. The only person who's going to help you is the nurse. That is why the most experienced operator has to be at the head end. The most experienced nurses should be with you. The most experienced nurses should be with you. Never use a nurse who is new for intubation. It can spell disaster. Always have an extremely experienced nurse. If that nurse is not there, wait, don't go fast, don't rush, call her. She has to be there. The most experienced nurse has to be there. Don't take any nurse. You understanding? That is why the ISCCM nurses are one of the most talented, most experienced nurses that we have. You must search for those nurses to be there at that moment. Most of them will be there at that moment. Okay. Okay, so highly experienced nurses should be there. Okay, that is the point when you're doing intubation, because they will already be all these protocols that we are talking, the nurses and the doctor should know. It is not useful just that the doctor knows or just that the nurse knows. Both of you all should know this protocol, otherwise it will not work. Otherwise this protocol will not work. Okay, now what is the fourth? We did 5 tweaks. Now the sixth tweak that we have is once you paralyze your patient, you have removed you have got how much time? You have got around 45 seconds. Once you paralyze the patient, you have around 45 seconds. Okay, in that 45 seconds, there is complete apnea. So in that stage, the BiPAP pressures you have to increase in order to watch the chest rise. So you have IPAP and EPAP, or what do we call it? What we call it in us, pressure support and pressure PEEP. You have pressure support and PEEP in our BiPAP. And so you will convert the mode from PASB to BiPAP, where you'll have a respiration now there. You'll have a frequency there. You understand now? Initially, when you started NIV, there was no frequency. Now you will convert the BiPAP machine to a frequency, and you will make the frequency as 18 or 20. You understand? You understand? So now you are ventilating your patient for that 45 seconds to 1 minute with a respiratory rate of 18 or 20 on a BiPAP mode, and you increase the pressure so that you can see the chest rise. So what are you doing at the head end? You're actually looking at chest rise. Okay. Meanwhile, you have already attached the EtCO2 to the BiPAP machine, so you're also seeing your EtCO2. Am I clear on this? Am I clear? Now, why is this so important? You have 1 minute, almost 45 seconds to 1 minute after you have given the paralytic agent. Scoline acts, it will take around 45 seconds to 1 minute, I told you. Okay, in that 45 seconds, you may be able to deliver 20 breaths. 1 minute is 20 breaths. Remember this. If you use an AMBU bag, you will deliver 100 breaths, because you will start doing the AMBU as much as your pulse rate. Okay, so it will cause almost 100 breaths. That is not supposed to be done. Ambu bag, because if you do that, you will induce extreme respiratory alkalosis, or you will induce auto PEEP, and the patient will have low blood pressure. You are understanding? That is why a BiPAP on a frequency of 18 you apply, and you increase the pressure so that you will see a visible chest rise. So if you are at the head end, what you will tell the patient? What you will tell the nurse? Nurse, please convert the patient to a BiPAP. Start a frequency of 18, because at this moment frequency was not 18. Okay, at this moment he was just on a NIV. He was just on PASB plus PEEP. Okay, now you're telling them put PASB plus PEEP plus frequency, or if you want, start the patient on PASB plus PEEP plus frequency. That means pressure support plus PEEP plus frequency. Keep the frequency at 18. Okay, but what you're going to tell the nurse? Increase the pressure support, because I can't see a chest rise. So you will probably increase the pressure support to somewhere around 18, 20, 25, 30, so that you can see a visible chest rise. So this is another tweak that we did during your intubation process for that 1 minute. Okay, for that 1 minute, now you have delivered exactly 18 breaths. If you don't do that and you apply an Ambu bag, you will unknowingly press the Ambu at 1200 ml. The Ambu capacity is 1200 ml, 1200 ml. And if you press that Ambu bag with two hands, you will give 1200 ml to a lung that is already spoiled. That means you will induce ventilator induced lung injury. We don't want to do that. And that is the reason we want to use our BiPAP machine, which will give regulated amount of volume. Of course, you don't give too much of volume. If you give too much of volume, there will be a lot of ventilator induced lung injury. Clear on this? Am I clear on this process? Am I clear on the process? Now, again, the tweak over here is, after you have intubated your patient, you have seen your blood pressure, NORAD, everything, you have done all these things. You have to get back to IPPV. That means the moment you've intubated your patient, your pressures are high, your frequency is 12, 18. You have to quickly come to the, you have to remember on background that you have to convert to IPPV and start the patient on, say, 400 ml of tidal volume, because during this process, you have kept the PEEP of high 12, 15, 20, you have kept that PEEP. You have to come down on the PEEP also. Okay, because you wanted to pre-oxygenate with BiPAP, you kept PEEP of 12, PEEP of 14, and you kept pressure supports of 20 and 25. You have to quickly come back and convert to IPPV at usual pressures, PEEP and tidal volumes. Clear on this? So this is the difference in an intubation that comes in from OT and intubation that comes in ICU. Even the rapid sequence intubation has to be modified. Okay, even the rapid sequence intubation has to be modified. Have you understood this now? Shraddha, have you understood this? Shraddha, Priya?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What about Shraddha? Shraddha is not here only. Okay. All right. So any queries here? Any queries on rapid sequence intubation? Any queries? So we have to know rapid sequence intubation, and we have to do it. Actually, now you should practice this mentally. If you have a patient that is going to come in, what am I going to do? It should be very clear in your mind. I'm going to keep this ready. I'm going to keep this is going on. My preparation phase, my pre-oxygenation phase, my equipments, my post-intubation care, post-intubation drugs, post-intubation sedation, post-intubation ventilatory changes, pre-intubation BiPAP machine. All that should be clear in your mind. If it is not clear in your mind, you will create a mess. You will create a mess. Remember this, that you can kill the patient during your rapid sequence intubation. Remember this, and it is important that you don't do that. And the only way to do that is by understanding exactly how to do this entire process. Clear? Any questions? Any questions from anyone? Any questions? Sulakshana, any questions? She's also there, Sulakshana. Ruchika, Priya, Niharika, Kanchan.
No, sir.
No, okay. So we'll end as of now, and we will next time do Foley's urinary catheter, Foley's catheter, catheter associated urinary tract infection, and we'll try to learn about intercostal.
Sir, ICD.
This we are going complete practical. ICD, okay, ICD also we'll do next time. आज नहीं कर सकता हूँ मैं. I'm very tired today. हाँ?
Okay, sir.
I have some consultations also left now. Okay. Priya will do it next time, Priya.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
We will do intercostal drainage. We will do Foley's catheter. We will try to touch upon intra-aortic balloon pump also if possible. But I think these two are big subjects. Intercostal drainage and ICD and Foley's catheter are very big subjects. We will do both of them. Foley's catheter and ICD, very important. COTY, how to diagnose COTY, what is it, what is, what is Foley's catheter, how do, what are nursing responsibilities, ICD responsibility, all that we will do. Okay, see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, sir.